immigration figures, which are horrendous. Horrendous if you want to get a GP appointment. Horrendous if you want to travel around Britain's motorways. Horrendous if you want your kids or grandkids to ever get a foot onto the housing ladder. Horrendous in terms of producing very disjointed societies and communities. And the message is pretty clear. 750,000 in the last year. And don't believe the lies and spin that it's a 20% reduction from the year before. It isn't. The year before's figures have been raised now in 2 instalments by 230,000. So let's get it into our heads. In 2023, under a Conservative government, nearly 1 million net people came into our country. This after manifestos in 2010.
Right. Let's talk about something absolutely mental happening in Westminster. The Ministry of Defence is staring down a £28 billion black hole over the next 4 years. £28 billion. That's not a rounding error. That's not loose change down the back of the Downing Street sofa. That's the kind of money that makes your eyes water and your accountant have a nervous breakdown. And here's the kicker. Whilst our most senior military chiefs are warning about this financial catastrophe, the government is simultaneously planning to send British troops to Ukraine and picking fights with Russian tankers in the English Channel. You couldn't make this up if you tried. It's like discovering your bank account is overdrawn while simultaneously booking a luxury holiday and buying a sports car. Absolute madness. Quick favor. If you're finding this interesting, smash that subscribe button and hit the notifications bell. Over 94% of you haven't subscribed yet. It's completely free, takes literally 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep bringing you this content. Cheers if you did. Right, back to this unfolding disaster. So let's break down what's actually happening here, because it's genuinely wild. Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, Britain's most senior military officer, the Chief of the Defence Staff himself, sat down with Prime Minister Keir Starmer before Christmas and delivered what can only be described as a financial horror show. £28 billion short. Over 4 years. Despite all the promises about increasing defence spending, despite all the tough talk about standing up to Putin, despite all the chest-thumping rhetoric about Britain being a serious military power, the reality is we're absolutely skint. The cupboard is bare. The coffers are empty. We're militarily broke. And apparently, Starmer wasn't best pleased. According to reports, the Prime Minister was genuinely frustrated because he'd been under the impression that the recent Strategic Defence Review had been fully costed. Fully costed. Someone had apparently told him, "Don't worry, boss. We've done the maths. It all adds up." Spoiler alert, it absolutely did not add up. Not even close. It's the governmental equivalent of assuring your mate you've definitely got enough petrol to reach Scotland, only to break down somewhere near Birmingham. Embarrassing doesn't quite cover it. Now here's where it gets properly interesting. The Defence Investment Plan, which was supposed to outline exactly how the Strategic Defence Review would actually be delivered in the real world with real money, was due to be published before Christmas. Key words there. Was due. It's been quietly delayed. Pushback. Kicked down the road. When the government quietly delays publishing something that was supposed to come out before Christmas, you know it's because the numbers are absolutely horrific. Nobody delays good news. Nobody pushes back a report that says everything is brilliant. This delay screams we're in serious trouble and we need more time to figure out how to spin this disaster. But wait, it gets better. Because whilst all this financial chaos is unfolding behind closed doors, publicly the government is ramping up its military commitments at an absolutely astonishing rate. This week, Starmer confirmed that British troops could be stationed in Ukraine if a peace deal is agreed. Britain and France unveiled plans as part of this coalition of the willing to deploy a multinational force to Ukraine in the event of ceasefire. We're talking about putting boots on the ground in one of the most volatile regions on Earth, right on Russia's doorstep, at precisely the moment when our military chiefs are saying we're £28 billion short of what we need. The audacity is genuinely breathtaking. And Russia's response? Subtle as a brick through a window. Moscow has made it crystal clear that any Western troops sent to Ukraine will be considered legitimate combat targets. Not advisors, not peacekeepers, not observers, legitimate combat targets. That's diplomatic speak for we will absolutely shoot at them. So we're potentially sending British soldiers into a situation where they could be directly engaged by Russian forces, while simultaneously being unable to properly fund our armed forces. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant planning. Now let's talk about these Russian tankers, because this situation is genuinely like something from a spy thriller. The UK has joined a US-led mission to seize Russian-flagged tankers, part of what Putin calls his shadow fleet. These are decrepit old ships, some of them barely seaworthy, that Russia uses to transport oil whilst dodging sanctions. They're environmental disasters waiting to happen, floating rust buckets that could cause catastrophic oil spills at any moment. So there's definitely a legitimate reason to be concerned about them. But Russia, unsurprisingly, isn't thrilled about this. The Russian Foreign Ministry has accused Britain of maritime piracy. Maritime piracy. That's the kind of language you'd expect from the Napoleonic Wars, not 2025. But that's where we are. Tensions between London and Moscow are escalating rapidly, with both sides trading increasingly aggressive statements. On Thursday, reports emerged that a Russian zombie tanker, presumably one of these Shadow Fleet vessels that's technically dead but still somehow operational, was transiting the English Channel. Defense Secretary John Healey responded by reiterating his commitment to step up action against such vessels. More tough talk, more aggressive posturing, all whilst the Ministry of Defense is desperately trying to figure out where to find £28 billion. And here's the absolutely bonkers bit. Starmer told President Trump this week about the threat posed by an increasingly aggressive Russia in the high north, suggesting more could be done to protect the region, whilst also claiming that European allies had already stepped up. So we're simultaneously saying Russia is increasingly aggressive and we need to do more, whilst also being completely unable to afford to actually do more. It's like warning your neighbors about a break-in whilst admitting you can't afford to fix your broken locks. But here's where the rubber meets the road. According to the Times, the internal mood of the Ministry of Defense does not reflect the government's tough public rhetoric. Publicly, it's all Britain stands firm. We won't be intimidated. We're committed to defending our allies. Internally, it's apparently more like we're absolutely screwed financially and we need to make massive cuts immediately. The disconnect between the public posturing and the private reality is staggering. A military source told the Times something genuinely chilling. You need to look at big-ticket items to cut. Ministers have to make big decisions about big things. Translation: we're not talking about trimming around the edges here. We're not talking about cutting back on office supplies or reducing the T budget. We're talking about axing major military programs, cancelling significant equipment orders, making decisions that will fundamentally reshape Britain's military capabilities for decades to come. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp also piled in, criticizing the government and warning that the latest crossing showed ministers have no control of our borders whatsoever. He pointed out that the Prime Minister himself had admitted there was no effective deterrent in place, which rather explains why illegal migration continues at scale. Philp insisted the only solution was leaving the European Convention on Human Rights and deporting all illegal migrants within a week of arrival, claiming that approach would bring crossings to an end. Whether that is legally or practically feasible is debatable, but it certainly sounds decisive, which is often half a battle in politics. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is not sitting quietly through all this criticism. In his first cabinet meeting of 2026, the Prime Minister issued a defiant statement insisting the United Kingdom will turn a corner this year on several matters, including the migrant crisis. But his rhetoric took an interesting turn. Rather than focusing purely on policy solutions, Starmer framed this as an existential political battle. He presented the choices between a Labour government renewing the country or a reform movement that feeds on grievance, decline, and division. His characterization of reform was particularly sharp. He accused them of wanting a weaker state, injecting bile into communities, and wanting to appease Putin. That last bit is a reference to Nigel Farage's more sympathetic comments about understanding Russia's security concerns regarding NATO expansion, which have proven politically controversial. Starmer called this the fight of our political lives, one that Labour must relish. He acknowledged the scale of the task, but insisted his team had the necessary belief and nerve. Governments do not lose because polls go down, he argued. They lose when they lose belief or nerve. We will do neither, he declared. It is stirring stuff, The kind of rallying cry designed to energize a cabinet that has endured a rather bruising few months. But here's the problem with stirring rhetoric. It does not stop boats. It does not house British families on waiting lists. It does not solve the fundamental mathematical problem that Britain cannot indefinitely accommodate everyone who wants to come here while simultaneously providing adequate services to existing residents. Inspiration is lovely, but people want results. The political dynamics here are absolutely fascinating. Labour is trapped in a bind of their own making. They correctly identified that the Conservative approach to immigration was not working. They promised to smash the criminal gang facilitating crossings through enhanced international cooperation rather than the Rwanda scheme they derided as an expensive gimmick. But months into power, the boats keep coming, the numbers keep climbing, and they are now facing the same criticism they lobbed at Conservatives. Meanwhile, they are implementing policies like buying new social housing for asylum seekers that are politically toxic with exactly the working-class voters Labour desperately needs to retain. Reform UK, meanwhile, is positioned perfectly to capitalise on this mess. They can point to the continuing crisis as evidence that the establishment parties, whether red or blue, are fundamentally incapable of controlling immigration. They can claim only their more radical solutions, leaving the ECHR, mass deportations, turning boats back at sea, will actually work. Whether those policies are practical, legal, or moral is almost beside the point politically. They sound decisive, and in politics, perception often matters more than reality. The Conservative Party finds itself in the odd position of criticizing Labour for a crisis they themselves failed to solve during 14 years in power. Chris Phil can demand leaving the ECHR all he likes, but voters might reasonably ask why Conservatives did not do that when they had the chance. Political memory is inconveniently long sometimes. What is absolutely clear is that this issue is not going away. The first boats of 2026 have already arrived. More will follow. The weather will improve, the crossings will increase, and the political pressure will intensify. Every arrival feeds a narrative that Britain has lost control of its borders. Every pound spent housing asylum seekers whilst British families wait for social housing fuels resentment. Every political promise to fix the problem that goes unfulfilled erodes trust in the entire system. The tragedy underneath all this political theatre is that there are no easy answers. The global displacement crisis is enormous. War, persecution, and poverty drive millions to seek better lives. Britain's geographic position, language, economic opportunities, and historical connections make it an attractive destination. Criminal gangs have industrialized people smuggling. International law constrains what governments can legally do. The English Channel is treacherous, and allowing people to drown is morally unacceptable to most Britons even if they oppose illegal immigration.